Henry James. Henry James, now considered one of the foremost writers of 19th century realism, did not achieve widespread recognition during his lifetime. He is best known for works such as The Portrait of a Lady and Daisy Miller, both of which continue to captivate readers. Henry James's literary creations, including his critiques, short stories, and novels, draw substantial influence from European history and culture. His writing prominently features the European upper class and their formal traditions, reflecting his profound interest in this milieu. James' narratives often revolve around Americans exploring the refined yet somewhat stifling European lifestyle, a theme that has greatly contributed to his popularity. Over the course of his career, Henry James produced an impressive body of work comprising 22 novels, more than 100 short stories, autobiographical pieces, several plays, and critical essays. Henry James was born into a family of affluence and education in New York on April 15, 1843. His father, Henry James Sr., was a renowned clergyman and a prominent intellectual with connections to some of the most influential and erudite individuals of his time. The James family placed a strong emphasis on education, and Henry's siblings, like him, achieved significant accomplishments. His brother, William James, became a noted philosopher, while his sister Alice James was a diarist. James's cosmopolitan outlook can be attributed to his extensive travels between America and Europe during his formative years. The exposure he gained during this period significantly influenced his later literary work. He received tutelage from various instructors in cities such as Geneva, London, Paris, Bologna, and Bonn. At the age of 19, Henry briefly attended Harvard Law School, but soon abandoned his legal studies to pursue literature. While he initially aspired to become a playwright, a substantial portion of his literary career was dedicated to writing plays, although they never achieved the same level of success as his novels. Eventually, he ceased writing for the theatre and transformed some of his plays into novels. Critics and scholars have categorized Henry James's work into three distinct phases. The first phase encompasses his early works, characterized by direct and simplistic writing. In the second phase, he delved into drama and short stories, paving the way for the third phase, during which he produced extensive novels. Henry James is acclaimed for various works, including Daisy Miller, a narrative centered around a young American girl who struggles to assimilate into the sophisticated European traditions. The Portrait of a Lady is another masterpiece exploring the experiences of an American woman traveling in Europe. The Bostonians portrays the rising feminist movement, and What Maisie Knew tells the story of a young girl forced to choose between her parents and an older governess. The Wings of the Dove is a beautifully written love story and a notable contribution to American literature, while Henry James himself considered The Ambassadors his finest work. One of his renowned novellas is The Turn of the Screw, a chilling ghost story, and several of his novels have been adapted for the screen, including The Wings of the Dove, Washington Square, and The Portrait of a Lady. On February 28, 1916, Henry James passed away due to pneumonia and the effects of a stroke he had suffered a few months earlier. Daisy Miller. Daisy Miller is a novella penned by Henry James. It made its debut in the Cornhill magazine in June to July 1878 and was subsequently published in book form the following year. This narrative revolves around the courtship of Daisy Miller, a beautiful American girl, by Frederick Winterbourne, a sophisticated fellow countryman of hers. However, Winterbourne's pursuit of Daisy is impeded by her own flirtatious nature, a trait frowned upon by the other expatriates they encounter while traveling through Switzerland and Italy. Summary of the novella. The novella introduces us to Annie Daisy Miller and Frederick Winterbourne in Vevey, Switzerland, within the gardens of a grand hotel. Winterbourne, allegedly taking a break from his studies and rumored to have an attachment to an older lady, is vacationing there. Their first encounter is facilitated by Daisy's 9-year-old brother, Randolph Miller, who holds their hometown of Schenectady, New York, in the highest regard. However, Daisy is enamored with Europe, particularly the high society she aspires to enter. Winterbourne, initially perplexed by Daisy's attitude, soon concludes that she is merely a young flirt despite being captivated by her beauty. He persists in pursuing Daisy, despite the disapproval of his aunt, Mrs. Costello, who dismisses any family that maintains such a close relationship with their career as the Millers do with their Eugenio. She also regards Daisy as a shameless young lady for agreeing to visit the Chateau de Chillon with Winterbourne after knowing him for just half an hour. 2 days later, they travel to the Chateau de Chillon. Despite Winterbourne having paid the janitor for privacy, Daisy is not overly impressed. Winterbourne informs her of his impending departure for Geneva the following day. Daisy expresses her disappointment and taunts him, ultimately inviting him to visit her in Rome later in the year. In Rome, Winterbourne and Daisy have an unexpected encounter in the parlor of Mrs. Walker, an American expatriate whose moral values have adapted to those of Italian society. Rumors about Daisy meeting with young Italian gentlemen render her socially unacceptable under these standards. Winterbourne becomes aware of Daisy's growing closeness to a young Italian of questionable social standing named Giovanelli, along with the escalating scandals stemming from their behavior. Daisy remains unperturbed by the open disapproval of the other American expatriates in Rome, and her mother seems largely oblivious to the underlying tensions. Winterbourne and Mrs. Walker make efforts to convince Daisy to distance herself from Giovanelli, but she adamantly refuses. On one evening, Winterbourne takes a stroll through the Colosseum and discovers a young couple sitting at its center. To his dismay, he realizes the couple comprises Giovanelli and Daisy. Overcome with fury towards Giovanelli, Winterbourne confronts him, questioning his audacity in bringing Daisy to a place where she risks contracting Roman fever or malaria. Daisy, however, expresses her indifference to the risk, prompting Winterbourne to leave them. Tragically, Daisy falls ill and passes away a few days later. The Portrait of a Lady. Published in 3 volumes in 1881, The Portrait of a Lady is a novel by Henry James. It stands as the pinnacle of the first phase of James's literary career and is a profound study of Isabel Archer, a young American woman filled with potential. Her journey takes her to Europe, where she becomes ensnared by her own provincialism. The novel provides an incisive examination of the American character and embodies the national myth of freedom and equality, tempered by historical blindness and pride. Summary of the novel. The novel introduces us to Isabel Archer, hailing from Albany, New York. She is summoned by her maternal aunt, Lydia Touchet, to visit her aunt's wealthy husband, Daniel, at his estate near London. This invitation comes following the death of Isabel's father. At the estate, Isabel meets her uncle and her amiable cousin, Ralph Touchet, who is unwell, as well as their robust neighbor, Lord Warburton. Isabel initially rejects Warburton's impromptu marriage proposal, as well as the hand of Caspar Goodwood, the charismatic son and heir of a wealthy Boston mill owner. Though she is drawn to Caspar, her dedication to personal independence precludes such a union, as she believes it would necessitate the sacrifice of her freedom. Following the death of the elder Touchet and at the behest of his son Ralph, a substantial portion of the estate is left to Isabel. Empowered by her substantial inheritance, Isabel embarks on a journey through Europe. There she crosses paths with Gilbert Osmond, an American expatriate in Florence. Unbeknownst to Isabel, her acceptance of Osmond's marriage proposal has been actively promoted by the accomplished but untrustworthy Madame Merle, another American expatriate she had met at the Touchet's estate. Isabel and Osmond establish their home in Rome, but their marital bliss erodes quickly due to Osmond's overwhelming egotism and his absence of genuine affection for his wife. Isabel develops a fondness for Pansy, Osmond's presumed daughter from his first marriage, and wishes to honor her desire to marry Edward Rosier, a young art collector. However, Osmond, who is snobbish and disapproves of the match, hopes Pansy will accept Warburton's proposal. Isabel suspects that Warburton's interest in Pansy might be insincere, and this conflict exacerbates the strain within her already unhappy marriage. Isabel subsequently discovers the truth that Ralph is nearing death at his estate in England and prepares to be by his side in his final moments. However, Osmond selfishly opposes this plan. Concurrently, Isabel learns from her sister-in-law that Pansy is not Osmond's biological daughter, but is the result of Madame Merle's illicit relationship with Osmond over several years. Isabel makes a final visit to Pansy, who pleads with her to return someday. Isabel reluctantly agrees and departs without informing her resentful husband. She journeys to be with Ralph in England until his passing. At this time, Caspar Goodwood encounters her at Ralph's estate, pleading with her to leave Osmond and run away with him. He embraces her passionately, but Isabel escapes his fervent pursuit. Goodwood seeks her out the following day but learns she has set off once more, presumably bound for Rome. The conclusion of the novel remains open ended, leaving readers to contemplate whether Isabel returned to Osmond to endure her marriage in noble tragedy, possibly for Pansy's sake, or if she embarked on a mission to rescue Pansy and leave Osmond. At the core of the portrait of a lady is James's exploration of Isabel's journey as she confronts her own destiny. The novel delves into her transformation from a free spirited individual into someone who, despite her newfound wealth, becomes ensnared in the conventions and constraints of society. James offers an astute examination of the American character, embodying the national myth of freedom and equality while juxtaposing it with historical blindness and pride. The Art of Fiction. Partial Portraits is a collection of literary essays by Henry James, originally published in 1888. In this book, James compiled essays that he had written over the previous decade, primarily focusing on English and American writers. However, the collection also features discussions of Alphonse Daudet, Guy de Maupassant, and Ivan Turgenev. One of the most significant essays in this collection is The Art of Fiction, where James passionately advocates for broad creative freedom in both content and technique in the realm of narrative fiction. Summary. The Art of Fiction serves as a direct response to the ideas put forth by English critic Walter Besant, who had penned an article attempting to establish the laws of fiction. For instance, Besant argued that novelists should limit their storytelling to their personal experiences, asserting that a young lady brought up in a quiet country village should avoid descriptions of garrison life. In contrast, James contended that a perceptive novelist could draw knowledge from diverse sources and employ it to excellent effect. He argued that the young lady living in a village has only to be a damsel upon whom nothing is lost to make it quite unfair, as it seems to me, to declare to her that she shall have nothing to say about the military. Greater miracles have been seen than that, imagination assisting, she should speak the truth about some of these gentlemen. Throughout the essay, James continually emphasizes the paramount importance of unfettered freedom for novelists in their selection of subject matter and the methods they employ in storytelling. He states, the only obligation to which in advance we may hold a novel without incurring the accusation of being arbitrary is that it be interesting. James, in particular, expresses wariness about constraining fiction with specific moral directives, asserting no good novel will ever proceed from a superficial mind. That seems to me an axiom which, for the artist in fiction, will cover all needful moral ground. James exemplifies his own advice when critiquing the various writers featured in Partial Portraits. For instance, in his extensive essay on Guy de Maupassant, James recognizes Maupassant's tendency to adopt a somewhat pessimistic view of human existence, which he humorously dubs the monkey's cage. Nonetheless, James praises Maupassant for his vigor, precision, and conciseness in depicting life as he perceived it. This collection of essays provides valuable insights into Henry James's perspectives on the art of fiction and his critical assessments of prominent writers of his time. What Maisie Knew and the Turn of the Screw. What Maisie Knew. What Maisie Knew is a novel by Henry James, initially published as a serial in the Chap book and later in the New Review in 1897. It was subsequently released as a complete book later that year. The novel offers a poignant portrayal of Maisie, a sensitive young girl, caught in the tumultuous lives of her divorced, irresponsible, and self-centered parents. The story traces Maisie's journey from early childhood to precocious maturity. The novel begins with the divorce of Beale and Ida Farang, parents to the very young Maisie. The court decree mandates that Maisie will split her time between her parents, spending 6 months with each. However, her parents, who are both immoral and frivolous, use Maisie as a pawn to exacerbate their mutual hatred. Beale Farang marries Miss Overmore, Maisie's attractive governess, while Ida weds the amiable yet weak Sir Claude. To continue Maisie's upbringing, she acquires a new governess, the somewhat comical but dedicated Mrs. Wicks. As both Ida and Beale engage in affairs outside their marriages, Sir Claude and the new Mrs. Farang embark on a romantic relationship with one another. Maisie's parents ultimately abandon her and she becomes predominantly Sir Claude's responsibility. Gradually, Maisie is forced to decide whether she wishes to remain with Sir Claude and Mrs. Farang. In the novel's lengthy concluding section, set in France, a more mature Maisie wrestles with choosing between them and Mrs. Wicks, her faithful adult guardian. She ultimately concludes that her new parents' relationship is destined to crumble, similar to her biological parents' failed marriage. As a result, she leaves them and opts to stay with Mrs. Wicks, the most reliable adult presence in her life. The Turn of the Screw. The Turn of the Screw is a horror novella by Henry James, first published in serial format in Collier's Weekly from January 27 to April 16, 1898. In October 1898, it was included in The Two Magics, a publication by Macmillan in New York City and Heinemann in London. The novella unfolds the story of a governess responsible for two children at a remote estate who becomes convinced that the grounds are haunted. It is often categorized as a work of gothic and horror fiction. Summary of the story. On Christmas Eve, an unnamed narrator and their friends gather around a fire. During the gathering, one of the attendees, Douglas, reads a manuscript penned by his late sister's governess. The manuscript narrates the governess's experience being employed by a man who has assumed responsibility for his young niece and nephew after their parents' deaths. While the man primarily resides in London, he also owns a country house in Bly, Essex. The young boy, Miles, is sent to a boarding school, whereas his younger sister, Flora, remains at Bly under the care of Mrs. Gross, the housekeeper. The uncle, uninterested in raising the children, entrusts the governess with their upbringing, explicitly instructing her not to bother him with communications. The governess travels to Bly and commences her duties. When Miles returns from school for the summer, the governess discovers that he has been expelled, although he never discusses the matter. She refrains from pressing him on the issue, charmed by the boy. As summer progresses, the governess begins to spot two mysterious figures on the estate's grounds, a man and a woman who seem supernatural and remain unseen by other household members. She learns from Mrs. Gross that her predecessor, Miss Jessel, and another employee, Peter Quint, had a close relationship before their deaths. Jessel and Quint spend much of their time with Flora and Miles, leading the governess to believe that the two children are aware of the ghost's presence. Flora leaves the house without permission while Miles plays music for the governess. The governess notices Flora's absence and she and Mrs. Gross search for her, finding her by the lake. The governess believes Flora has been conversing with the ghost of Miss Jessel. When she confronts Flora, the girl denies seeing Miss Jessel and requests not to see the new governess again. Mrs. Gross takes Flora to her uncle, leaving Miles with the governess, who eventually converses with him about his expulsion. At night, the ghost of Quint appears at the window and the governess shields Miles. The governess informs Miles that he is no longer under the control of the ghost, only to discover that Miles has died in her arms. The Wings of the Dove and the Ambassadors. The Wings of the Dove is a novel by Henry James, originally published in 1902. The story delves into one of James's recurring themes, the clash between naive Americans and worldly, often decadent Europeans. Summary of the novel. Set in London and Venice, the novel revolves around Kate Croy, a Londoner who covertly encourages her secret fiancé Merton Densher to court and marry Millie Thiel, a wealthy young American afflicted by a mysterious ailment. Kate's rationale is that even though Millie's life may be short due to her illness, she should at least experience the joy of being in love. This would enable Merton to inherit Millie's wealth, subsequently allowing Kate and Merton to marry and enjoy affluence. Millie eventually discovers Kate's and Merton's motives, but her passing leaves Merton with a substantial inheritance, which he is too burdened with guilt to accept. Kate is unwilling to relinquish the inheritance, leading to her separation from Merton. Their relationship is irrevocably shattered by the unwittingly prophetic gift of Millie's love. The Ambassadors. The Ambassadors is a novel by Henry James, initially published as a serial in the North American Review in 1903. The novel is a dark comedy that follows the journey of the protagonist, Louis Lambert Strether, to Europe with the mission of persuading the son of his widowed fiancée to return to the family business. The narrative unfolds from Strether's perspective in the third person. Summary of the novel. Strether, the novel's focal point, is an editor from Massachusetts engaged to the widowed Mrs. Newsom. Disturbed by reports about her son Chadwick's romantic affairs in Paris, Mrs. Newsom pressures Strether to bring the young man back into his mother's sphere of influence. Strether finds that Chad has changed for the better, although the nature of his relationship with Mary de Vionnet, a woman slightly older than him, and her daughter Jean remains ambiguous. Strether's investigations proceed at a leisurely pace with the help of Miss Gostry, a friend of the Vionnets. As Mrs. Newsom impatiently dispatches the Pococks, the daughter, son in law, and the son in law's sister Mamie, who is Chad's fiancée, as reinforcements, her son expresses compliance, but Strether becomes entranced by the Viennets. His revelation about Chad and Mary's relationship is considered one of the most profound moments in American literature. The Pococks ultimately deferred to Chad concerning his own future, and he needs Strether's counsel to remain in Paris. In essence, The Ambassadors offers a tragic vision portraying characters who are predominantly victims of an apparently inescapable social framework. In this narrative, James excels in depicting individuals who are acutely aware of their diminishing youth and growing estrangement from the world. Through the character of Strether, he presents someone capable of choosing their own destiny, albeit not a triumphant one. The Golden Bowl. The Golden Bowl is a novel by Henry James published in 1904. Set in England, this intricately woven and emotionally intense exploration of marriage and adultery is often considered the culmination of the major phase of Henry James's literary career. The novel delves deep into the complex relationships between a father and his daughter and their respective spouses. It places a strong emphasis on the inner thoughts and consciousness of the central characters, providing meticulous detail and profound insight. Summary. The novel revolves around wealthy American widower Adam Verver and his daughter Maggie, who reside in Europe. Their lives are centered around their shared appreciation for art and each other's companionship. With the manipulative assistance of Fanny Assingham, Maggie becomes engaged to Amerigo, an Italian prince experiencing financial difficulties. Unbeknownst to Maggie, Amerigo rekindles an affair with her long-term friend Charlotte Stant. The significance of the Golden Bowl is introduced when Charlotte shows it to Amerigo in a shop and he rejects it, noting flaws. Maggie and Amerigo eventually marry. Later, both Maggie and Amerigo, as well as Charlotte and Adam, that's Maggie's father, become aware of the ongoing affair, but none of them seeks a direct confrontation. The veneer of propriety remains unbroken until Maggie purchases the golden crystal bowl for Adam's birthday. This gesture finally cracks the facade of the characters' lives, bringing the truth to the surface. The Golden Bowl is a novel that intricately examines the complexities of human relationships, deceit, and the delicate balance between love and loyalty.